Welcome to the Samuele Show, where business, innovation and sustainability converge to drive progress. Are you ready to uncover solutions shaping our future? Let's dive in.
Welcome to a new episode of the show. And today we are going again to discuss agriculture and regenerative agriculture, discovering Syntropic. What is that? And we do it with a wonderful startup here in Kenya who is disrupting the market. So I'm very pleased to have the CEO and co-founder, Sven Verwiel. Sven, it's such a pleasure to have you here today at the show.
Likewise, Samuele, likewise. Very nice to be here and a big fan of what you're doing with your podcast. So well done.
And Sven, really, I'm excited to understand more about this syntropic agriculture, a new regenerative way to produce, especially, regenerating the soil and working, copycatting more or less what nature is doing. But before that, we want to know, Sven, how you have ended up, in farms and agriculture. So what is your journey?
It took a while to decide on doing any kind of tertiary education. So I went to university quite late, but I ended up studying aquaculture and fisheries management. I went to a really cool little university in southern England and we did a lot of practical stuff from the get-go. So it was very, very hands-on learning. And I realized quite quickly, even though we were studying such a diversity of systems from tropical to cold water to fresh water to marine to bivalves, crustacean. We did everything. But I realized quite quickly that the aquaculture industry was very heavily focused on a single species at a time, and there was very little integration. And so I started learning myself on the side a lot more about integrated systems that were a bit more closed loop and where there was no waste products. And that sort of led me down the kind of permaculture rabbit hole. And then when I finished university, I ended up learning a lot more about terrestrial systems and traveled to quite a lot of countries to go look at tropical agricultural systems. And I was just always fascinated by more of an integrated agricultural approach rather than a sort of monoculture approach. And I think it wasn't until I visited Brazil the first time that I sort of really saw the power of what syntropic agroforestry was about. I'd read a lot about it. I'd seen it a lot on YouTube. But then when you walk through some of these, really well-established farms in Brazil, whether they're small scale or large scale, you realize how incredible they are and also how similar the Brazilian context is to Africa. And so that sort of was the beginning of my journey, I suppose.
And that is a wonderful journey, from aquaculture, realizing, the issues there, and then now moving to agriculture. And now in Kenya, you have brought this concept of syntropic. So maybe people are not that familiar with that. Can you walk us through what does it mean, syntropic agriculture? What is difference maybe with conventional agriculture, for example?
Right. So before I explain syntropic agroforestry, it's useful to clear up two very common misunderstandings. The first being that syntropy isn't actually an agricultural term. It comes from physics and systems theory. Just as entropy describes the tendency of systems to lose order over time, syntropy describes the opposite tendency, the way living systems organize, accumulate energy, and increase complexity. The second thing is that it has nothing to do with the tropics. Syntropic systems work anywhere where life organizes itself, temperate zones, drylands, boreal regions, and that's because the principles are universal. Agriculture is simply one of the clearest places where these dynamics can be intentionally designed. So syntropic agroforestry is farming really that follows the physics of life instead of fighting it. And syntropy builds increasing order, diversity, and productivity over time. So where most agricultural systems are designed to maintain yields through external inputs and usually increasing external inputs, sort of season on season or year on year, syntropy is really designed to improve performance through mostly biological organization, I would say. Many conventional farming and forestry systems aren't necessarily degrading year after year, but they're typically designed to remain stable. A field is treated as a two-dimensional surface. managed across length and width and optimized to occupy roughly 100% of that space. Syntropic systems deliberately add two additional design dimensions. So the first being stratification. Plants are arranged in vertical layers, if you like. So from the ground to the shrubs to the understory to the canopy and to the emergent species, each occupying a different light niche, rooting depth, and growth rhythm. This allows the same piece of land to be productively occupied multiple times over without competition becoming limiting. The second one is time. So through natural succession, species are selected and sequenced according to how ecosystems naturally evolve. So short cycle crops establish quickly, medium term species follow, and long lived trees mature later, all planted together but expressing themselves at different moments. Harvests are timed to open light and space for the next functional layer rather than resetting the system. We then manage energy pulses through pruning and harvesting mostly. These interventions prevent senescence, which is basically the stage where growth slows and biological activity plateaus, and keep the energy, carbon, and sort of nutrient cycling forward through the system. And because these processes operate simultaneously in space and in time, syntropic systems don't just maintain productivity, they compound it. In practice, this often translates into the equivalent of about 200 to 230% land use efficiency compared to flat two-dimensional systems of 100%. And yeah, most systems are designed to hold the line, whereas syntropic systems are designed to move it forward, I would say.
I've seen some documentaries, we have seen the one that was presented, I think, at COP in Paris, Life in Syntropy, the work that was done in Brazil. This, let's say, agroforestry system that mimic a bit, the nature. And as you said, is a comprehensive one. But, what really interested me, Sven, is that you are not just doing it in a way that is nice, maybe academically, or nice as an NGO project, but you pivoted it towards business, and then you founded Forest Food. So how you balance this tension? Now an experiment, a very innovative approach, and then the work of a company that needs to be profitable. I mean, is it really profitable, this system?
Well, so thanks for asking that. But basically, I think my personal initial attraction to it was, a very, very highly productive system that doesn't just do really good things for the landscape or for the farm or for the environment itself, but it can also be financially viable and commercially attractive. So, having visited lots of farms in Latin America and talking to the owners and the founders, I wanted to make sure that whatever we did with Forest Foods, like you say, was 100% a business case study. And so that's the journey we're on, is proving that on a per hectare, on a per square meter basis, it is just as, if not more profitable than, conventional systems. And we're certainly on our way to profitability. And I think we would have been profitable already had we had more land in the current context under our belt. It certainly is a very profitable way of managing the land, because all the densities and all the agronomical sort of knowledge in Syntropic has come from conventional. All of our spacing we use is identical to conventional. The difference is we have a lot more output per square meter than the conventional field would.
Let me put myself in the devil's, advocate. So, Sven, can you give us some concrete examples of the work that you have done and how really, you have transformed, from the poor soil, low yield, so productive agroforestry system?
Look, the first system I ever set up was in Turkana. We were hired with a different company I co-founded. We were hired to set up a couple of farms for the communities. And so that was the first syntropic system I ever set up myself. And that was really interesting because within just 6 months of starting, we attracted a lot of life. We arrived there very poor conditions, extremely hot. I mean, I remember measuring the soil temperature at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was looking at 65 degrees centigrade, about 4 inches down, which is not really viable for any plant. But we had an abundance of dung beetles, we had an abundance of crows, and an abundance of solifugids and scorpions. Those were pretty much the wildlife we had on the farm sites we took over. And within 6 months, we recorded hundreds of species of birds, hundreds of species of insects, a dark soil compared to a very, very sandy, dry soil when we first started. So that was for me the biggest trigger. Was it was also my first time doing it, and what we were able to transform over just a short period of time. I mean, eventually we stayed there for 3 years. The same transformation I saw up in Timau when I started a farm up there in 2019. And then I've seen very similar effects on the farms we currently have, both up in Limuru, formerly in Ruiru, and now as well in Naivasha, is just how fast you can change or have an effect on the soils as well as the plants themselves in a short period of time.
Maybe for the benefit, Turkana is northern Kenya, very arid area. And then Limuru, Ruiru, and Naivasha more central, let's just say central Kenya, different conditions, but also quite interesting, to understand. And how have you seen, because we know that Naivasha is world famous, for agriculture also, good soils, but how you have seen the output from your farm that you have set up? How long does it take for an agroforestry system? Because we know Syntropic needs a lot of trees, some spacing, and what. How long does it take, to start production and really also outpace conventional agriculture?
Yeah, fantastic question again. I think really everything is context specific, right? So I think let's be clear on that. I think something beautiful about the syntropic way of thinking, I'm not going to say the syntropic model because I don't think that's correct to say, but the syntropic way of thinking is that it's applicable to any type of land management, any type of agriculture, from large scale arable to livestock to very, very intensive horticulture, floriculture. I mean, it's all possible. So I think everything needs to be talked about context specific. With Forest Foods currently, we are very much focused on intensive horticultural context and a little bit of livestock. So I guess I'll use that more as an example. But in terms of time frame, when you're working with horticulture, you see results very, very quickly because you've got some of your very fast growing crops ready to harvest within the first couple of weeks. Okay, now I'm not saying that you're certainly going to see a big change in the first couple of weeks, but a recent discovery of ours, in focusing on plant health rather than soil health, you can turn around a scenario very quickly by focusing on the plant health rather than the soil health. The soil health will come, and the soil health definitely takes longer to change. But if you focus on your plant nutrition from the very get-go, you can have very quick results above the ground and under the ground. And I think because of the diversity that you plan into your syntropic systems, from very fast growing to very slow growing species all planted together, you get a multiplication effect compared to doing a single crop on its own, or even a small bit of a multi-crop system. It really lends itself to changing landscapes very quickly.
I want to go a bit deeper, a bit also in the business model, because one of the critique that sometimes is say, to this type of agriculture is that very fine, you're doing wonders to the soil, the planet, and everything. But, does it have a green premium? And does this green premium is there, or with scale? So let's say this syntropic agriculture, or maybe let's say regenerative agriculture, can compete also on price with and so make it more affordable and more widespread for people.
Again, Samuel, I think it's context specific, right? I think you'd be quite foolish in today's day and age to think that horticulture is cheap, right? Both as an investor as well as a farmer, like there's nothing cheap about intensive horticulture. Generally speaking, it's very aggressive planting, very aggressive harvesting, the cold chain, the logistics. Horticulture, just in a nutshell, is not cheap. There's nothing cheap about it. So if somebody is going to compare horticulture to arable farming, for an example, they're completely different contexts. But I think let's just stick to the horticultural context for now. And I think another big fallacy out there is that right now a lot of emerging regenerative brands are still the minority, not the majority, and therefore they're a bit more niche. They're probably a lot higher quality in terms of what the final product is. So therefore, in general, it seems that they're fetching more of a premium by way of choice, probably from the producer. For us, for an example, we target initially a premium market because we're producing only a premium quality product. We don't have the scale to produce volume per se, but more so we're focused on quality over quantity. There's no reason why products grown in syntropic systems can't actually even be cheaper in the end of the day than conventionally grown things. But it really depends on the context of your market, right? Like we purposefully target a high-end market because we produce a high-end quality product.
Yes, and then also your scale is not that huge, so of course your production is still there. And I want to give a subsequent question. Some people say, "Oh, you're talking from Kenya. It's an emerging market." So which is the response, which is also the demand from, we know that we have discussed a lot the emerging market, future market, the growing middle class. So what is the perception and also from the consumers? And is it really something that better food, I say high quality food is something that is being now demanded even here in our context?
Yeah, so I think the demand side is still in its infancy. It's still growing. Like there's definitely a growing demand for healthier, better products that are grown in either ecologically or socially more responsible contexts. But I think the demand side is certainly still in its early developmental stages. Right now, if we had 10 times the land, would we be able to sell it all under the same strategy locally? Probably not. We'd probably also need to look at regional markets as well as perhaps overseas markets. But it's definitely on the rise and it's definitely growing. Yeah, I would classify it like that. But I think just backing up to your previous question, Samuele, I think it's quite good to talk about up-to-date figures and just to give you an idea of productivity per hectare. Last year, so in 2025, we just closed off the books and the numbers last week. Just in 2025 alone, on less than 2.5 hectares of an actual production footprint, we did about, it depends on whether you want to talk in dollars or in shillings, but we did about $115,000 off 2.5 hectares, which is pretty impressive regardless of where you are in the world for outdoor agriculture, right? Mostly in horticulture, those numbers can be achieved in greenhouses or in very automated systems. But this is 100% outdoor production, zero chemicals, and very, very few fertilizers. The only ferts we use is our own biocomplete compost and a little bit of mineral sort of trace element and mineral amendments. So that just shows you what 2.5 hectares can do in the local context.
No, but this is, an impressive number for revenue in such a small land. Then with a system that usually you get those type of revenues, such bigger scale with some more complex infrastructure. So it's really a sign that the business case is there. I want to touch on a thing that before going maybe more on the business and the discussion, the integration with livestock. So usually, how do you integrate livestock? Because we know in our context, farms can be mixed use or livestock, agriculture, and thing, and can be also replicated maybe with small scale farmers, such a model?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the only livestock we've worked with so far continuously is chickens, and some people might not even consider them as livestock. We've been working with laying chickens since day zero, basically since day one, and instead of growing horticultural crops in between our tree lines, we we grow pasture, and we have those chickens on pasture. So going back to when you asked me to explain what Syntropic is, because it's a form of agroforestry, we obviously have in lines, I would say we have tree lines, and then generally speaking, we have either pasture in the middle or horticultural crops in between those tree lines. Okay. So when I'm talking about tree lines and pasture, that's what I'm trying to make the people visualize right now is in between each tree line we've got mixed pasture, and that's how we've always been raising our chickens, and we move them on a daily basis so that they sit on fresh pasture every day, and we don't bring them back onto that same piece of pasture for at least 30 to 40 days until the pasture is recovered, and that we're sure that none of their fecal matter can house anything that's dangerous for them in terms of disease or parasites. So that's mostly how we've worked with livestock. Our new partnership in Naivasha also has some grazing animals as well. So they've got some doppers, and then in about 3 to 6 months from now, we'll be introducing cattle. So everything is done on a strip grazing, controlled grazing with electric fences or with mobile chicken coops. Everything is done in a very controlled manner, but in a strip grazing style.
And this is very interesting, just to have an integration, together, agriculture, production, livestock. So it's really this is a circular in the design model. And I want to ask, since we have a lot of we discussed in the podcast a lot, and I want to take a question that I did before: is this model also sustainable for small scale farmers? Somebody that's want to start, regenerate the farm and doing it in a different way.
I would say yes, 100%. I first want to say that I think traditional agriculture anywhere in the world, but let's keep it to the African context. Traditional agriculture has always been very much a polyculture, very much an integrated agriculture, from short-term crops to medium-term crops to really long-term crops. There's always been a livestock element as well. So it's not like the small scale or smallholder farmers don't know this or don't have this in their history somewhere. Perhaps what I'm saying now is, I suppose it's just a slightly more organized form of a mathematically sound polyculture. And I think we've worked, especially partners of mine in the business, have worked with thousands of smallholders in different parts of the continent and have introduced this very successfully to them. So it's not a matter of scale. It's not a matter per se of how wealthy you are or not as a farmer or what kind of tools you have or mechanization. It's about having a multidisciplinary attitude when it comes to how you treat your landscape. And that's, I think, one of the barriers to scaling this quickly is you have to have a generation of farmers that has multidisciplinary ability, right? Not just of one type of crop. Like to do this, you need knowledge on long-term tree crops, you need knowledge on fruit trees, you need knowledge on fast-growing vegetables. So, you have to have a mixed knowledge base if you really want to get good with this.
And I can see here a low-hanging fruit in this type of approach. That is also how we solve the issue of youth leaving agriculture, moving to city, the urban migration, because it makes it in a way profitable, as you have told us, but also more, let's say, interesting, also more multidisciplinary, integrated, and other, which requires, a skill level that can be attractive also, for the youths, generating returns and also differentiation.
No, definitely. Look, I think one of the four main reasons we started Forest Foods, like the fourth reason being, how can we provide a model that's sexy for the next generation? And by sexy, I mean it's financially attractive, it's pleasant, it's career based rather than job based, like because your knowledge base will never stop growing in agroforestry systems. It becomes naturally more of a career path than a single monocrop. And also, like, how do we weave tech and mechanization into this, and how can we get them excited about that? Because there's nothing exciting to young farmers about going back to really old ways unless it means like less chemicals, less fertilizers. And that's something major about Syntropic too, is just how it's a resource building system rather than a resource depleting system. And you can look at that from fertility all the way to irrigation, all the way to ground cover, biomass, etc., etc. So for me, this is exactly what the future of agriculture should look like, and should be a very attractive, sexy thing to pick up for young farmers.
And that is what really we want, really, to solve also the food crisis for a growing population. And Sven, I mean, I can see the passion, the really technical knowledge on that. But we add also one layer, because you have not just doing it for a research, as I said, or for a NGO project, but you are doing as a startup, as a business. So it's a complex model, because you need to have understanding of agriculture, forestry, livestock, how to rotate, how to organize. But then, of course, then you have the usual headaches that startups, they have: the funding, the risk, the skill. Plus, you are in agriculture, which usually is even more riskier, because the weather you're doing in the outdoors. And so can you tell us a bit the journey? Which is the most difficult thing that you have witnessed during building forest food, and how you have overcome, those difficulties?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been a bittersweet journey. Like we all of us who built this business and who are still building it are very passionate about what we do, very serious about what we do. But that doesn't mean it's all hunky dory and easy peasy. Like it's been very difficult to find the right land, to find the right relationships with the landowners, to find the right rates. The capital is probably the biggest challenge, finding the right type of capital, because it's not necessarily that you need ultra patient capital. No, not at all. Like we have a cash flow statement just like any other horticultural business. We have a payback period just like any other horticultural business and or forestry business. But it's combining all those different disciplines and having a wide enough market to sell all your stuff and sell it on time to prove profitability. That's probably the biggest challenge, especially in a place where demand is still on the rise. And I think matching the costs of production with the current market pricing we've chosen to go for. I won't lie, like our current production models are extremely expensive to run because our farms are on the outskirts of Nairobi and we don't own them. And so rent is extremely expensive, water is extremely expensive, labor is pretty expensive in and around Nairobi. So, if we could copy paste what we're currently doing and the footprint we're on and put that into a cheaper part of the country, profitability comes a lot quicker. But then you've got the problem of logistics. And I think logistics is probably one of the biggest challenges in Africa at the moment. Is the per mile or per kilometer logistic cost right now is probably higher in Africa than anywhere else in the world. And with fresh horticultural produce, you've got a very short shelf life, even if you have refrigerated infrastructure.
And the cold chain is not that developed. Availability also of electricity sometimes in very rural area can be difficult. I mean, now solar is on the rise, but of course it requires some capex. So it's not an easy. But I can see, the journey, despite the difficulties, been quite successful, and it's really also turn, the narrative that those type of system can compete in the market with conventional, agriculture and horticulture. And I want to ask this question to you. So Sven, now you have been in this journey for some years, and I'm sure, as you say, there's been a sweet and bitter experience. Now, if you fast forward a bit your work with forest food in the next 10 to 15 years, how would you see this landscape evolving? Is it becoming regenerative agriculture becoming more the norm? How do you see that also, and how do you see also the perception of consumer toward this type of production?
Yeah, so I think there's two ways of answering that. There's a forest foods angle, which I'm happy to answer, where we will hopefully be in 10 years. But then I think, like you alluded to second, like where is the general consensus when it comes to, or what's the general trajectory of sort of regenerative ag in this part of the world? So I think they're two separate questions. I think I'll answer the second part first, which is, yeah, regenerative is certainly growing in terms of both the demand and the supply side. You've got big organizations, throwing that word out there and using it very irresponsibly. And you've got, more and more serious practitioners getting things going. So I think on the supply side, it's definitely starting to grow. And on the demand side, there's also growth. And I think in 10 years, my hope is that it becomes the norm, not the outlier. But that's probably wishful thinking. But I think it's very possible. Like, don't get me wrong. I think, regen ag is definitely a possibility and should be the norm in the next 10 years. So don't get me wrong there. I think where we just got to be careful that the name doesn't get sort of trashed and becomes just another buzzword like sustainable if we're not careful. But that let me not open that can of worms. Then I think forest foods, yeah, I mean, look, I think we'd love to be Africa wide at some point. It'd be great to have a franchise in multiple African countries. I mean, we've already worked with multiple clients in other countries from a consultancy perspective, but I think we started Forest Foods, you know, I like primarily to create a brand. And I think the beauty of creating a brand is that you can open shop in anywhere you want. And I would love to see this brand go to other African countries too. I think a little bit shorter term, it would be really nice to see, hundreds of farmers. I don't really care what scale. Like, I would love to have an army of small holders all over the country. I would love to have an army of commercial farmers who want to change their philosophy and change their model into what we're doing. And then to have sort of thousands of hectares across the country in each of Kenya's different agroecological zones and have really robust, amazing models of just real sustained hectarage out there under this kind of management. I think it would be one of the only suitable ways to increase forest cover in this country. And it would certainly be a great way to give careers to younger farmers, and for those lucky enough to inherit farmland off their parents to turn around the production model into something far more harmonious with what we need going forward. I think would be where I see us in 10 years.
Fantastic. And I mean, it's not a small objective. I can see it require what, sometimes you say one of the characteristic of founder, a lot of grit, a lot of work, a lot of support, but it's also a lot of passion that I from your word and from your voice, it's really transpires also here through the waves of the internet. And if in closing this really the episode, I want to stake back what you say. It's really a model that can help the younger generation, the people, and really also do a transformation. So if I can ask you a message as a founder, as somebody in agriculture, to the young people, especially in our continent, that want to build similar venture to yours, maybe agriculture or others, what do you want to share with them and that you have witnessed as a founder and a successful entrepreneur?
I suppose again, I guess I'll say this from my own personal perspective, but I guess everything we're doing right now is for the next generation. We're not building these systems for us. We're building them for our children, to be very honest with you, because they have the ability to be so productive for so long. These forest systems, we have that ability to do that for our children. So I suppose, if we are serious about our children's future, not just our own, then we need more entrepreneurs. We need more big combination of people, landowners, farmers, entrepreneurs, business people, to jump on this train, because we don't want them to inherit an even worse situation than what we inherited in our generation. So really, I suppose this is all for the next generation. But, I guess to other entrepreneurs out there, I would say don't romanticize this path. It's certainly not glamorous. It's pretty messy, constant learning, high stakes decisions. I mean, it's not easy to find the right type of money to do what you need to do. And yeah, you got to be bloody confident and almost, stubborn about things. Otherwise, it's too easy to give up if you don't get your way, But I think, rebuilding the current sort of what I would call broken food system and restoring ecosystem is probably the most dignified work you can do. I read a quote this morning. It said sort of you need, occasionally you'll need a mechanic, occasionally you'll need a doctor, and occasionally you need a lawyer. But 3 times a day, 365 days a year, you need a farmer, right? And nobody can argue that. So I suppose, for any of you choosing this path, you're choosing the right one, and it's a global shift in how humanity feeds itself. It's big, it's meaningful, and it's worth it. But I suppose the biggest lesson in it all is just don't forget to bring yourself along for the ride, because if you forget about yourself in the process, then you can lose a lot more than just a dream or an ambition.
And Sven, fantastic message and a lot of food for thoughts. Really, thank you for having shared your journey. And I'm sure we will meet again and see, how forest food is really transforming agriculture, not only in Kenya here, but maybe in the broader region and in the continent. So thank you so much, Sven. It's been a pleasure and honor hosting you.
100%, Samuele, likewise. And keep your little Syntropic system going too. I'm proud of you, man.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Are you satisfied after this wonderful episode? Let's continue together our sustainability journey.